First, distract target. Then block his blind jab. Counter with cross to left cheek. Discombobulate. Employ elbow block. Physical recovery 6 weeks. Full psychological recovery 6 months.
Welcome to Countering the Nurse Guide. This guide will focus on giving you tips and tricks on how to deal with a nurse in chases primarily. Here is a list of things that will be covered in this guide. General juking, pallets, windows, lockers, saving against the nurse, firecracks and flashlights. Now I have already covered this in a different video, but if you want more examples then I suggest you go check those 2 videos out. Stealth and the nurse's weaknesses. Now I would like to point out before you start that if the nurse plays absolutely perfect, then you will get destroyed. There's nothing else to it. However, the risk of meeting a guard nurse is quite low. This guide will essentially focus on making the nurse make mistakes and keep second guessing her own choices. I'm going to try and give you as many tools to deal with the nurse as possible. So right, let's get into it. I'm going to start with the basics and keep piling more advanced moves on as we go on. General juking. The nurse works by predicting your movement and blinking to where you'll be ahead of time. Your job as a survivor is to make her predictions as hard as possible and force mistakes. This is where the first basic tip comes in, known as double bagging. When a nurse is blinking at you, run towards her and that will cause her to blink past you. This works fairly well when you make the nurse lose line of sight at you. You can do this by running behind trees, rocks and walls, and then double bag on the nurse. The issue with this move is that the nurse will eventually catch on and adjust her blinks by making them shorter. To deal with this, you now need to fake your double back by making the nurse perform a shorter blink than she actually has to, giving you more distance to dodge her second blink. If you're in the open and close to her, you might have to perform a 360 to dodge her second blink. There are many ways to play around with this, like doing a double fake into double back, or just straight up doing a double back into a double back, or doing a double back into a runaway. Now, all these moves are not always going to work, like in this example where I double back before even giving the nurse a chance to read my moves. You will often come into scenarios where you end up being extremely close to the nurse after dodging her blinks. A good trick is to run into her and circle around her, and then change direction. Because of the fatigue and FUV of the nurse, it is sometimes possible to lose her and gain some distance. Trees, rocks and other obstacles are also great for juking the nurse, as you can double back or double fake back into the trees or rocks. If the nurse blinks right in front of the tree, she'll have a hard time getting line of sight of you for her second blink. Furthermore, tiny rocks and trees have 2 different directions you can double fake or run behind, making the nurse have to guess more, which makes you more unpredictable. You can also perform 360s around trees when the nurse goes in for her killing blink. This can sometimes make her miss. I also have to mention that you can simply make distance on the trees or rock. You don't have to double back on it. This is a common mistake I see among a lot of survivors. They only juke in 2 directions and pretty much forget that they can just make distance on the object they're circling around. I want to showcase a few examples just to get my point across. In the first example, you can see that the nurse is blinking after me at the Z wall. I vault the window and run to the right side and fake a double back. Because the nurse blinked in front of the object, she now has to guess with her second blink where it would go. I could have stayed behind the wall, I could have double backed or abandoned the loop. You don't really want to go to the left here, as you will give the nurse line of sight for an easy prediction. Now, the nurse did choose the correct direction, but the blink wasn't quite far enough. However, she might as well have been wrong here and done a short blink to counter a double back. You just don't know, but you just have to guess. Another example is that you can also perform multiple fakes, like in this clip I fake a double back, and then I fake a doubling back to the right side of the tree and follow up with abandoning the loop. And then as the nurse comes close, I do an actual double back. Again, this was very close, it's never guaranteed, but it's better than doing nothing. You're way more unpredictable by doing stuff like this. Pallets. Contrary to most beliefs, pallets can actually be a fairly useful tool against the nurse. The reason for this argument is that the nurse can't be stunned when blinking through pallets. She can, however, be stunned in between her blinks, and there are some ways you can abuse it. For instance, you can force the nurse towards the pallet by fake doubling back on her. This forces the nurse to perform a short blink so she can land a hit on you. However, because you faked a double back, you will be in safety of the pallet. Now, the nurse could obviously just call the fake and blink to the other side of the pallet and hit you, but you could just as well have faked it and performed a reverse pallet stun on her instead. This works fairly well in my experience. The other trick you can do is quickly knock down a pallet and immediately vault over it. This is super risky though, and there's a good chance that the nurse will just call it. On the extension of that trick, you can fake vaulting back over the pallet again as well. If you have Dead Hard available, you can Dead Hard into the pallet so the nurse will miss, and then drop the pallet on her for a free stun. If out of line of sight, you can vault or drop a pallet, then quickly slow back over to confuse the nurse. Again, this trick is very risky, but it can throw the nurse off from time to time. Another trick you can do is bait out a blink from the nurse by pretending to run up and knock down the pallet, and then run away as the nurse blinks at the pallet. Windows. Windows are another way of duking the nurse as well. Once you have vaulted the window, try and lose line of sight of the nurse, then double back and vault the window back over. Now, if the nurse plays her cards correctly and have 2 blinks at her disposal, then this shouldn't really work. However, if she only has 1 blink, then there's a good chance this will actually succeed. Another thing you can do in a tight chase is vault the window back over, although there's a fairly good chance this won't work either. In a similar fashion, this can also be performed with pallets, for instance. The best advice I can actually give for windows is faking them, especially if you can lose line of sight of the nurse and it's also running quick and quiet, which is a really great perk by the way. An even better way to fake windows is to Dead Hard into them, as it looks very convincing that you're actually going to vault the window. I want to show an example here, where I vault the window into the shack. From this position, I can actually see where the nurse is aiming with her blinks. When I see she's going to blink to the inside of the shack, I immediately vault back out from the shack and gain a lot of distance on her. Lockers. Lockers can be used as a last resort against the nurse. If you can, try and make sure you bait out a swing and as many blinks as possible. Otherwise, the nurse's fatigue cooldown might not be long enough for you to make an actual escape. Saving against the nurse. When the nurse is proxy camping a survivor from afar with her blinks, try and bait out some of her blinks or a swing before you go for the actual save. By doing this, you don't just end up making a trade, but actually give yourself a fighting chance to escape the nurse as well. Flashlights and firecrackers. Flashlights are an extremely useful tool against the nurse. The best way to use flashlights against the nurse is actually in between her blinks. When the nurse has used her first blink, aim the flashlight on her to deny her the second blink. This works best if you're running in a straight line, as it is much more easy to predict her and know where to aim your flashlight. This usually results in one of 2 things. Either the nurse looks away and cancels her blinks to avoid the blind, or she takes the blind and blinks away. Here is what that looks like from the nurse's perspective. This is a trick that actually works the majority of the time. In all of my gameplay, this has only failed me like once. Another thing to keep in mind is that once the nurse is blinded, she can't actually blink again. Another way of blinding the nurse is after she has used her blinks and is fatigued. However, if the nurse knows what she's doing, she'll most likely just look away and you will have ended up using a lot of flashlight and wasted time. I would recommend doing this against mediocre or inexperienced nurses. You can also try and blind the nurse as she's about to charge her first blink. However, this is super risky and requires a lot of practice and timing. You basically have to predict when the nurse is going to charge her blink before you start flashlighting her. You can also use it as a way of zoning or denying her blinks for a very short time. It's usually best to perform this while trying to help other teammates escape. When the nurse is about to blink at your teammates, intercept the nurse and blind her as she's about to blink at your teammates. This works really well if you're both doing it at the same time, as blind speed will stack. and you can deny the nurse from blinking for a time. It is also possible to burn the nurse if she's charging a blink, and you can manage to hold a flashlight on her for approximately 2.1 seconds, with a stun timer of approximately 2 seconds. However, this only really works if the nurse isn't very experienced. The timer for the burner is simply too long, even if you try and use it when helping teammates. The nurse can charge her blink way faster than you can possibly burn her. It should be said that if you're 2 people flashing the nurse, the burn timer will go down to about 1.1 seconds, so there is some potential here. If you ever see the nurse holding down her blink like this for a long time, then run at her and start trying to blind her. This puts a lot of pressure on the nurse, because if she keeps holding down her blink, she will get burned. What most nurses will do here is blink into the ground. However, as long as the nurse is facing you, it is still possible to blind her. If she looks away, then that's fine too, because then she won't be able to blink at you. Usually you should come out victorious if this happens. Firecrackers are an excellent tool against the nurse as well. Firecrackers will both burn and blind the nurse instantly. When the nurse is blinking, drop the firecrackers so they'll explode at the location where the nurse is going to land. Because the nurse is usually quite far away from you when blinking, it also means you can't see the drop animation very well, making the chance of a blind more successful. Stealth. Stealth is a different way of dealing with a nurse, and can be done by losing him mid chase, and can also be quite effective. This is usually something you want to do when you have some distance on the nurse. When you have managed to lose line of sight of the nurse, you can try and find a tiny object like a rock or a tree and circle around it. The nurse has a terrible base movement speed, meaning that it's a lot easier to circle around objects without her finding you. The fact that the nurse also gets fatigued after her blinks means it's a lot harder for her to track you, and she might even blink past you sometimes. Urbanation is great for this, as you can already add to the nurse's weak patrol speed. Another thing you can do is run Object of Obsession. Now, most mobile killers are more than happy to chase you when you're Object of Obsession. You can abuse it by baiting the nurse in for a potential free kill, then hide and juke. This will make the nurse waste a lot of time while actually accomplishing nothing. In general, if you want to be more successful at juking the nurse as well as 360ing her, then it's vital that you wear an outfit that falls well into the background of your environment. If you wear bright flashy clothes, then it's a lot easier for the nurse to track you, obviously, but if you have something like black clothes or grey or blue that falls really well into the background like on Macmillan, then it's going to be a lot easier for you to juke the nurse. Weaknesses. Apart from the weaknesses already shown in the video, there are others that I wish to share with you. The nurse is one of the killers that suffers heavily from corn blindness. Your chance of juking the nurse in the cornfield is much higher than in the open. It can be very hard for the nurse to track through all that corn. Backwater Swamp is another map where the nurse can have a hard time tracking you as well. The same goes for Larry's Memorial Institute, but that's more because she will lose line of sight of you constantly. The differences in altitude is also something the nurse can struggle with, but it is not necessarily a problem. If the nurse wants to perform a short blink when holding down her blink, she can accidentally blink down to the next level of the map. There are a lot of places you can abuse this. The most obvious one is the basement, where if you loop on the side with the stairs, you can sometimes force the nurse to blink down there. Some nurses will instead blink around it to avoid blinking into the basement. The Combine is another example, where it can be tricky for the nurse to hit the right elevation. Just a few months ago, it was impossible for the nurse to blink up here. The nurse also can't blink outside of the map, which means that she's forced to blink around map corners like these. I have already talked about this, but the more blinks the nurse uses, the longer she will be fatigued. If the nurse uses a lunge, that cooldown will be added on top of her fatigue. Hey guys, thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this guide. It took quite a while to make, it has a lot of clips in it. I didn't include all the examples I wanted, like I think I skipped moonwalking and like tight corners and tiny rocks and stuff like that you can circle around. If the nurse isn't very good with the blinks, you can do stuff like that. Especially if you're new at the game, I really hope that this will help you get better, because the nurse can be quite a monster to deal with. Yeah, that's about it, and take care guys.